The thing about hitting rock bottom is that it does not always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it arrives quietly. On a Wednesday morning in November, when you are standing in a gas station parking lot in Memphis, Tennessee, counting the bills in your wallet with the specific, careful attention of a man who already knows the answer and is hoping the recount will change it. Joel Hartley counted twice. $40 in his wallet, $160 in the envelope in his glove compartment. $200 total, which was everything he had until the 15th, which was 11 days away, which meant $20 a day for food and gas and whatever else the world decided to require of him between now and then. He put the wallet back in his jacket pocket and stood there for a moment in the cold November air, looking at the gas pump, doing the math on whether he could afford a full tank or whether he should put in 20 and stretch it. He put in 20. Joel was 38 years old. He had been a project manager at a mid-sized construction firm called Hartley Brothers, yes, his family's firm, the one his father had built and his uncle had expanded, and which Joel had joined at 24 with the specific pride of a man who understood that he was inheriting something worth protecting. He had managed projects across 4 states, overseen teams of 30, brought jobs in on time and under budget, with the regularity of someone who treated every deadline as a personal commitment. And then his father had died, and then the arguments with his uncle about the direction of the company had gone from uncomfortable to permanent, and then Joel had walked out of a board meeting 14 months ago and not gone back. He had not planned to be unemployed for 14 months. Nobody plans that. He had assumed 3 months, maybe 4. He had a resume that was solid, references that were genuine, and a skill set that translated across industries. He had applied with the confidence of someone who expected doors to open and then watched, month by month, as the doors stayed closed, in the specific, inexplicable way that the job market sometimes operates, not because you are insufficient, but because timing is its own kind of weather, and you cannot always predict it. His wife, Karen, had been patient for 8 months. Then she had been less patient. Then she had taken their son, Cooper, 6 years old, gap-toothed, obsessed with dinosaurs, to her mother's house in Nashville and told Joel that she needed him to figure this out, that she believed in him, that she was not leaving him. She was just giving him space to become the version of himself that she knew existed. He had been alone in the Memphis apartment for 6 months. He called Cooper every night at 7. Cooper told him about dinosaurs and his new kindergarten teacher and what he had eaten for lunch. And Joel listened with the complete attention of a man who understands that a 6-year-old's daily report is not small talk, but the most important conversation available to him. After Cooper went to bed, Karen sometimes stayed on the line for a few minutes, and they talked with the careful, measured quality of 2 people who still loved each other and were trying not to damage what remained, while they waited for the circumstances to change. The circumstances had not changed yet. On the morning of the 23rd, Joel had a job interview. It was with a regional logistics company called Summit Operations, a mid-level project management role that paid reasonably and would not have been his first choice 18 months ago, but was, at this point, exactly what he needed. He had spent 4 days preparing. He had pressed his suit, the navy one, the good one, the one he had worn to his father's funeral and tried not to think about that, and polished his shoes and printed 3 copies of his resume on paper. That was slightly heavier than standard because his father had taught him that details communicated, things words did not. He drove to the interview in his 2016 Camry, which needed an oil change he had been postponing, and which made a sound he had been ignoring. He arrived 12 minutes early, because he was the kind of person who arrived 12 minutes early even when everything else in his life had slipped its schedule. The interview went well. He could feel it going well the way you can feel a conversation finding its rhythm. The questions landing in places he had prepared for, his answers coming out with the clarity of someone who had genuinely lived the experiences he was describing. The hiring manager, a man named Phil Garrett, had leaned back in his chair at one point and said, "I can see why you ran the projects. You ran, and it was the most encouraging thing anyone had said to Joel in a professional context in over a year. He walked out of the Summit Operations Building at 11:45 feeling, for the first time in a long time, like the ground beneath him might be solid. He was walking to his car in the parking garage when he heard the sound. It was coming from the stairwell, a sharp gasp, then silence, then the specific heavy sound of something large hitting concrete. Joel stopped walking. He looked at the stairwell door. He thought for approximately 2 seconds about the interview that had just gone, well, in the car that needed an oil change and the $200 in his possession, and Cooper's dinosaur report at 7 o'clock. Then he pushed open the stairwell door. The man was on the landing between the second and third floors. He was large and well over 6 feet, broad, the physical presence of someone who had once been very strong and was now somewhere in his late 60s and carrying the weight of decades of serious work in his body. He was wearing a suit that cost more than Joel's monthly rent. He was on his back, one hand pressed to his chest, the other flat on the concrete, and his face was the color that faces go when the heart is sending distress signals that the rest of the body cannot ignore. Joel was beside him before the door had fully swung closed behind him. He had taken a wilderness first aid course 7 years ago, required for a construction project in a remote area of Montana. He had not thought about that course in years. It came back now with the specific clarity of physical memory, and not recalled so much as activated. The way the body remembers things the mind has filed away. He checked the man's airway. He spoke to him firmly. "Sir, can you hear me? Stay with me. What's your name?" He loosened the man's collar and tie without hesitation. He checked his pulse. Present. Irregular, too fast, and positioned him carefully, and took out his phone and called 11 and gave the dispatcher the exact location with the precision of a project manager who had spent 15 years communicating critical information under pressure. The man's name was Richard. Joel learned this because Richard, despite being in the middle of what Joel correctly suspected was a cardiac event, was attempting to communicate. His voice was thin and came in pieces like a signal breaking up. But the pieces were clear. Richard, wallet, wife, Ellen. "I've got you, Richard," Joel said. "Help is coming. You don't need to talk." Richard looked at him with the eyes of a man who understands that he is in serious trouble and has found, improbably, someone to trust. He stopped trying to talk. Joel stayed with him. He stayed for the 11 minutes it took the paramedics to arrive, monitoring Richard's breathing, keeping him still, keeping him focused with a steady stream of calm, unremarkable talk about the cold front coming through Memphis, about the grizzlies, about the particular ugliness of parking garage, stairwells as a general category of architectural choice. He did not know if Richard could follow any of it. He talked anyway, because silence in that situation had a weight to it that he did not want Richard to carry alone. When the paramedics arrived, Joel stood back and gave them the handoff with the same clean precision he had given to Dino 11, timeline, observations, position, pulse rate as best he had measured it. The lead paramedic glanced at him and said, "Are you medical?" And Joel said no. "Construction." And the paramedic nodded once and turned back to Richard. They took Richard out on a stretcher. Joel stood in the stairwell for a moment after they left, in the sudden silence, and noticed that his hands were shaking. He had not noticed while they were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs and breathed, and then walked back to his car and sat in the driver's seat for several minutes without starting the engine. Then he drove home and made a sandwich with the last of the bread and called Cooper at 7 and heard about a triceratops and a lunch that had included corn, which Cooper considered important news. He heard nothing from Summit Operations for 5 days. On the 6th day, he got an email. They had decided to go with another candidate. The email was 3 sentences and included the phrase, "We wish you the best in your search," which Joel had come to understand was the professional equivalent of a door closing quietly so as not to disturb the neighbors. He sat at his kitchen table and read the email twice and then closed his laptop and looked at the wall. 11 days left until the 15th. $140 now after gas and groceries. Cooper's birthday was in 6 weeks. He had not told Karen about the Summit rejection yet because he needed a few hours to absorb it before he could say it out loud without his voice doing something he did not want it to do. His phone rang at 4 in the afternoon. Unknown number. Memphis area code. He almost did not answer. He had developed a reflexive suspicion of unknown numbers over the past 14 months, most of them being either recruiters who had nothing real to offer or automated voices with opinions about his car's extended warranty. He answered. "Is this Joel Hartley?" The voice was a man's, older, carrying in it the particular authority of someone accustomed to being the most significant person in whatever room they occupied, but using that authority gently, the way powerful people sometimes do when they are genuinely grateful. "Yes. My name is Richard Calloway. You found me in a parking garage stairwell last week." Joel's hand tightened on the phone. Richard Calloway, it turned out, was the founder and executive chairman of Calloway Group, a construction and infrastructure development company with operations across the southeastern United States and annual revenues that Joel, when he later looked them up, found required him to sit down. Richard had been in the Summit Operations building for a board meeting. Calloway Group held a minority stake in Summit when his heart had decided, on the stairwell between the second and third floors, that 11 months of ignoring his cardiologist's recommendations had extracted their full price. He had had a stent placed. He was recovering. His wife Ellen, whose name he had tried to communicate on the floor of that stairwell, had apparently not left his bedside for 4 days. "I asked the paramedics if they had your name," Richard said. "They didn't. I asked the parking garage management to pull the camera footage and identify you. It took my assistant a week." Joel said nothing. "My cardiologist told me that the positioning and the way you kept me calm likely prevented a significantly worse outcome." He used the word intervention. Richard paused. "I don't use that word lightly." "I just stayed with you," Joel said. "Anyone would have." "No," Richard said, with the flat certainty of someone who had thought about this carefully. "They wouldn't have." The footage showed 2 other people enter that stairwell in the first 4 minutes. They left. The silence that followed that statement had a particular quality to it that Joel did not know how to fill. Richard filled it. "I understand you're in project management." "Construction background." "Yes. I have a VP of operations position that has been open for 4 months. I've interviewed 11 people." Another pause. "I'd like you to come in. Not as a favor. My HR director has already pulled your background independently." And she used the word exceptional, which she does not use. A breath. "I just want to make sure you get a fair shot." Joel Hartley sat in his Memphis apartment with $140 to his name and a rejection email still open on his laptop and his son's birthday 6 weeks away. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "I'd appreciate that very much." He interviewed 3 weeks later. 2 rounds, a panel, a practical operations assessment that was genuinely the most demanding professional evaluation he had undergone in his career, and which he found, and to his own surprise, that he was genuinely ready for. 14 months of unemployment had not diminished what he knew. If anything, the time had clarified it. The way a long stillness sometimes clarifies what you actually understand versus what you only thought you did. They offered him the position on a Friday afternoon. He called Karen from the parking lot of the Calloway Group offices in downtown Memphis, sitting in the Camry that needed the oil change, and told her. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said his name, just his name, once, in a tone of voice that contained inside it everything that the past 14 months had cost them both, and everything that this moment was returning. He moved them back to Memphis in January. Cooper started school in February and came home on the first day with a drawing he had made of their family, stick figures, the way 6-year-olds draw, with oversized heads and arms at improbable angles, and at the bottom, he had written in careful kindergarten letters, "My family is together." Joel put it on the refrigerator and left it there. Joel had thought for a long time that his father was talking about construction. He understood now that his father had been talking about everything.